The year was 1886, and the small English village of Alderbrook seemed frozen in time. Its cobblestone streets echoed with the clatter of horse-drawn carts, while the scent of wood smoke drifted from chimneys each evening. It was the sort of place where everyone knew each other's names, secrets, and sorrows. At the farthest edge of the village stood a modest stone cottage with ivy crawling up its walls. Inside lived a boy named Eliot Hargrove. At just 12 years old, Eliot was different from other children. He was pale and thin, with hair the color of wheat and eyes that seemed too old for his face. While boys his age played games of marbles or raced through fields, Eliot spent hours hunched over a candle, scribbling in notebooks. The other children laughed at him, whispering behind his back, "That's the boy who stares at graveyards." But Eliot was unfazed. For him, life was full of questions, and the greatest question of all was death. The villagers thought of him as peculiar, maybe even strange, but his mother, Clara, saw something else, a restless brilliance. And though she didn't fully understand his fascination, she often reminded herself, "A curious mind is never a curse. It is a gift, even if the world doesn't see it yet." Eliot's obsession began when he was just 6 years old. That was the year his father, Thomas Hargrove, fell ill and never recovered. Eliot was too young to understand sickness, but he understood silence. The silence left behind in his father's chair, in his unfinished tools, and in his mother's eyes when she thought Eliot wasn't looking. Most children, faced with loss, would turn away from it. But Eliot leaned closer. He began to ask questions that unsettled adults. Where does a person go? Why don't they come back? Can the soul be measured? His mother tried to hush him, saying such things were mysteries of God, but Eliot only grew more determined. By the time he was 12, he had read everything available in the village, medical books borrowed from the doctor, religious texts from Father Alcott, even travelers' journals that spoke of ancient rituals in far-off lands. He filled notebook after notebook with thoughts, sketches, and strange theories. To Eliot, death wasn't something to fear. It was a puzzle, a doorway, a riddle waiting to be solved. The villagers whispered nervously whenever they saw him near the churchyard. "That boy looks at graves the way other boys look at games," they said. But Eliot didn't care about their whispers. In his mind, the world's greatest secret was hidden in those gravestones, and he was determined to uncover it. Every night, Eliot sat at his small wooden desk, his candle flickering against the pages. His notebooks were filled with sketches of hearts and lungs, diagrams copied from books, and questions scrawled in the margins. Some pages held strange drawings of a misty figure rising from a body, a child's imagination of what a soul might look like. His mother sometimes peeked in at him, her heart heavy with worry. "Eliot, you must rest," she would say, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. "Your eyes will grow weak from all this reading." But Eliot would only smile faintly and reply, "If I can understand death, Mother, then maybe I can understand life too." Clara didn't know how to answer. She worried for him, but there was something in his tone, a quiet certainty, that made her hesitate to stop him. He wasn't merely a child lost in fancy. He was a boy searching for meaning. The candle burned late into the night, long after the rest of Alderbrook slept. To the villagers, Eliot was peculiar, but to himself, he was a student of the world's deepest mystery. One crisp autumn morning, Eliot wandered beneath the great oak tree at the edge of the village and found a small bird lying lifeless in the grass. Its feathers were still warm, its wings curled as though it had only just fallen. Eliot's heart quickened. To others it was a tragedy. To Eliot, it was an opportunity to learn. He carried the bird home gently, cradling it as if it were still alive. In his room, he laid it on his desk, smoothing its feathers with trembling hands. For hours, he studied the bird, its still chest, its closed eyes, the eerie quiet that clung to it. He noted every detail in his notebook. Life leaves suddenly, but leaves behind a perfect shape. Is the soul motion or something unseen? He even placed a feather beside the body, writing, "A feather carries it through life. What carries it beyond?" For Eliot, this was not cruelty, it was reverence. He wasn't fascinated by the bird's end, he was fascinated by the mystery of what came after. That night he looked at his mother and whispered, "Death is silence of motion, but perhaps not silence of meaning." Father Alcott, the village priest, had begun to hear unsettling whispers. "The Hargrove boy toys with death," the villagers said. "He spends nights in graveyards. He collects dead things. He fills books with shadows." Troubled, Father Alcott visited Clara one afternoon. "Clara," he said gravely, "your boy is walking a dangerous path. Death is not a game, nor a subject for science. It is sacred. If he meddles too deeply, he may lose his soul." Clara defended her son gently. "He does not mock death, Father. He only wants answers to what we all fear." Father Alcott shook his head. "Some answers do not belong to us. They belong to God alone." Eliot, listening from the stairs, felt a fire spark inside him. If answers are hidden, why should they not be found? If God made the world, then did he not also make questions? Far from discouraging him, the priest's warning only made Eliot more determined. Despite the villagers' whispers, Eliot was not entirely alone. There was one person who didn't laugh at him: Margaret Whitfield, a girl with auburn hair and bright, curious eyes. Margaret was different from the other children. Where they mocked Eliot's oddness, she admired his courage to ask questions no one else dared. One afternoon, as Eliot sat sketching by the riverbank, Margaret approached him. "Why do you study death?" she asked, her voice gentle, not mocking. Eliot hesitated, then answered softly, "Because everyone pretends not to think about it, but it shapes everything we do. If I can learn about it, maybe I can help people not be so afraid." Margaret tilted her head, considering his words. Then, with a small smile, she whispered, "Then I'll help you." From that day forward, Eliot was no longer entirely alone. He had a friend who believed in him. With Margaret by his side, Eliot grew bolder. On moonlit nights, they would sneak lanterns into the village graveyard. While Margaret read aloud the names etched in stone, Eliot scribbled notes into his ever-growing collection of books. "See," Eliot explained one night, pointing to a row of markers. "This man lived 70 years. But the child beside him lived only 3. Death chooses differently, but perhaps there are patterns. Maybe it is not as random as we think." Margaret shivered in the cold, hugging her coat tighter. "It feels strange," she admitted. "Like we're walking among stories that ended too soon." Eliot nodded. "Yes, but every stone is a teacher. They tell us life is fragile and precious." Though the graveyard frightened her, Margaret stayed. Because in Eliot's strange way of seeing the world, she found not only questions, but a kind of beauty. By winter, Eliot's reputation had spread through Alderbrook. Children teased him, calling him the Death Boy. Shopkeepers muttered when he passed, shaking their heads. Parents warned their children not to follow his strange ways, yet Eliot walked with quiet dignity, never answering back. Margaret, however, grew angry on his behalf. "They call you mad," she told him, "but they don't see what I see. They don't see how much you care." Eliot smiled faintly. "Genius often looks like madness to those who don't understand." Her words became his shield. Though the village saw him as odd, Margaret's belief made Eliot feel less alone. Together, they pressed forward, determined to uncover truths the world preferred to ignore. Margaret, seeing the depth of Eliot's notebooks, came up with an idea. "You should share your work," she insisted. "There are people in London, scientists, scholars, who might understand you better than this village ever could." At first, Eliot resisted. They won't take a boy like me seriously." But Margaret persisted until, one cold evening, they carefully bundled his writings and sent them to a science academy in London. Eliot's letter was simple, yet powerful. "I am 12 years old, but I study death as if it were science. If knowledge can ease fear, should it not be shared?" Weeks passed, winter deepened. No reply came. Eliot told Margaret he didn't mind, but when he was alone, a small ache sat heavy in his chest. Still, he refused to stop writing. Whether the world listened or not, he would continue his search. That winter, illness swept through Alderbrook like a cruel wind. Coughs echoed in the streets, and the graveyard filled faster than Eliot's notebooks could keep pace. He recorded symptoms carefully: who grew weaker, who recovered, who did not. For the first time, death wasn't distant. It was everywhere. One evening, he whispered to Margaret, "If I could understand why some live and others don't, maybe I could stop it. Maybe I could save them." His eyes burned with a mixture of desperation and hope. Margaret placed her hand on his, whispering, "Not every answer is yours to find, Eliot." But Eliot couldn't stop himself. His curiosity was no longer just curiosity. It had become compassion, a desperate desire to shield others from the pain he had known since his father's death. For Eliot Hargrove, the boy who studied death like science, the mystery had suddenly become personal. Eliot had always believed his questions might one day lead to answers, but that faith shattered when Margaret's grandmother fell ill during the winter sickness. Margaret adored her grandmother, who had raised her as much as her parents. Eliot promised to help. He sat by the bedside, recording every detail: the rise and fall of her breath, the fever in her cheeks, the stillness that spread slowly through her frail body. "Is there nothing you can do?" Margaret whispered one night, clutching his hand. Eliot wanted desperately to say yes, but when the old woman passed in the early dawn, Eliot could only stare, hollow and trembling. Margaret's sobs tore through the room, and for the first time, Eliot felt not curiosity, but despair. That night, he shut his notebook and wrote only one sentence on a clean page: "Knowledge without love is empty." It was the first crack in his armor of logic, the moment he realized that answers alone could not heal grief. For weeks, Eliot carried the weight of failure. He avoided Margaret, ashamed he had given her hope when he had none to give. But one afternoon, sitting beneath the oak tree where he had once found the fallen bird, something struck him. He opened his old notebooks and read his earliest lines, scribbled in the shaky hand of a grieving child. "If I understand death, maybe no one else I love will leave me." Suddenly it became clear. He had never been chasing knowledge for its own sake. He had been chasing love, trying to protect it, preserve it, defy the loss that haunted him since his father's death. That evening, he visited Margaret. "I can't promise to stop death," he said softly, "but I think I understand something now. Death teaches us to value what is living, not to fear the ending, but to honor the time before it." Margaret's tears softened into a fragile smile. For the first time since her grandmother's passing, she felt comfort. And Eliot, too, felt something shift inside him. His obsession had become something greater, a mission not to solve death, but to help people live. News of Eliot's quiet wisdom began to spread through Alderbrook. At first, it was just Margaret's family who felt comforted by his words. But soon, others began to seek him out. When a child died of the sickness, Eliot sat with the grieving parents, speaking not as a scientist, but as a boy who understood loss. "Your child's story is not gone," he told them gently. "It lives in you. Every laugh, every memory, it's still here." The villagers were surprised. This was the same boy they had once mocked as the Death Boy, the one they whispered about as strange. Now he spoke with a kind of wisdom that soothed aching hearts. Slowly, their whispers changed from scorn to respect. They began to see not a boy obsessed with shadows, but one who could bring light to the darkest moments. For Eliot, it was a revelation. His notebooks had been full of science, but perhaps his truest gift was not knowledge, but empathy. One bright spring morning, a letter arrived at the Hargrove cottage, stamped with the seal of London. Clara handed it to Eliot, her hands trembling with pride. Eliot tore it open eagerly. It was from Professor Charles Redmond, a scholar at the Science Academy. The words made Eliot's heart race. Your observations are remarkable for one so young. Science may not yet answer all you seek, but your spirit of inquiry is rare. Continue to question, but do not forget to live. A mind like yours must hold both knowledge and compassion. Eliot read the letter aloud to Margaret, his voice trembling with excitement. For the first time, someone beyond his small village had seen his worth. He wasn't just a strange boy filling notebooks. He was a mind recognized by scholars. That night, as he placed the letter carefully inside his journal, Eliot whispered to himself, "Perhaps my questions do matter after all." The shift in the village was slow but steady. Where once people crossed the street to avoid Eliot, they now greeted him with nods of respect. Mothers asked him to speak with grieving children. Fathers sought his quiet counsel. Even Father Alcott, once stern, began to soften toward him. Eliot never claimed to have all the answers. Instead, he offered stories, reflections, and gentle truths. At a gathering in the church hall, he told the villagers, "Death is not only an end, it is a teacher. It reminds us to love deeply, to forgive quickly, and to live fully. It is the shadow that makes the light more precious." The hall was silent, many with tears in their eyes. Margaret watched him, her heart swelling with pride. The boy once ridiculed had become a voice of comfort, a bridge between fear and hope. But fate is cruel in its timing. That same spring, Clara, Eliot's beloved mother, fell gravely ill. She had been his anchor, the one who believed in him when no one else did. Eliot stayed by her side, his notebooks forgotten, his hands trembling as he held hers. "Mother," he whispered, "I studied death to fight it. But now I see. It teaches me to cherish you while I can." Clara smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "Then you have learned well, my son. Love is stronger than fear. That is the greatest lesson of all." She passed away quietly, her hand still in his. Eliot felt the world collapse around him. For all his wisdom, he was still just a boy losing his mother. The graveyard that had once been his classroom now became his deepest sorrow. After Clara's burial, Eliot fell into despair. He shut his notebooks and pushed them under his bed. For weeks, he wandered the village in silence, hollow-eyed, refusing to speak even to Margaret. "How can I teach others when I cannot even comfort myself?" he muttered one night, staring into the dying embers of the hearth. Margaret refused to let him disappear into grief. She placed a candle and one of his notebooks in front of him. "Your mother believed in your gift. Don't let grief bury it too. You always said death is a teacher, then let it teach you now." With trembling hands, Eliot opened the book and wrote, "Love is stronger than death, for it lingers in the living." For the first time since Clara's passing, he felt her presence, not in the silence of absence, but in the warmth of memory. By summer, Eliot had changed. He was no longer only the boy who studied death. He had become something rarer, a philosopher in a child's body. Travelers passing through Alderbrook stopped to hear him speak. They marveled at his quiet wisdom. When asked about death, Eliot no longer drew diagrams or quoted from books. Instead, he said, "Perhaps death is not an end, but a doorway. What matters most is how brightly we live before it. Every kindness, every love, carries forward beyond the grave." People left his company with lighter hearts. Some called him a genius, others a prophet. Eliot did not care for titles. He only wanted his words to help people the way they had once helped him. Margaret, watching him speak beneath the oak tree where their journey had begun, thought, "This boy is changing not just our village, but everyone who hears him." Years later, after Eliot had grown into a young man, Margaret stumbled upon one of his earliest notebooks. Its pages were filled with clumsy handwriting, the kind of scrawls only a grieving 6-year-old could make. On the very last page, she found a single heartbreaking line. "If I study death, maybe no one else I love will leave me." Margaret pressed the notebook to her chest, tears filling her eyes. All along, Eliot's obsession had not been about science or fame. It had been about love, a desperate, childlike hope to stop the pain of loss. When she told Eliot what she had found, he smiled softly, though his eyes shone with tears. "Perhaps I was foolish," he said. "But maybe that foolishness gave me the courage to seek truths others feared. And maybe love was the answer all along." Eliot never became a famous scientist. His name never appeared in textbooks or grand halls of learning. But to the people of Alderbrook, his legacy was far greater. He was remembered as the boy who had once been mocked for his strange fascination, but who grew into a young man who turned sorrow into wisdom. Villagers told stories of how he comforted them, how his words carried them through grief, how he made them see death not as a thief, but as a teacher. And long after he was gone, his sayings lived on, whispered at gravesides and spoken at weddings alike. Death teaches us to love while we are alive. In the end, Eliot Hargrove, the boy who studied death like science, had not solved its mystery. Instead, he gave the world something more powerful: hope, love, and the reminder that life, no matter how brief, is worth living deeply.